My son woke up at 4 a.m. to cook Thanksgiving dinner for 15 people. He's training to be a chef. But my mother-in-law whispered to my wife, "Order pizza. Dog food's better than his." I heard it all, packed up, took my son, and left. What happened hours later made their jaw drop. I was standing on the front porch of our house in Dayton, Ohio, at 3:12 a.m., watching my son, Emmett, carry the last crate of ingredients into the kitchen. His 17-year-old hands moved with a confidence I hadn't seen since he was a toddler climbing the steps on his own. He was about to cook the most important meal of his life. "You sure about this, Em?" I asked, though I didn't really need an answer. I'd seen that same stubborn determination in the mirror 20 years ago, the moment I walked away from my cushy job as a food critic to carve something of my own. "Dad, I've been practicing for weeks. Chef Calhoun said if I nail this Thanksgiving dinner for 20 people, he'll personally write my recommendation to the Culinary Institute," Emmett said, grinning with that crooked, overconfident smile that reminded me of my own. "And Grandma Beatrice, she's coming?" I asked cautiously. "Yeah, and I'm proving to her that I'm not wasting my life." I clenched my jaw. Beatrice Marlowe had been making subtle, cutting comments about me and my life choices for decades. She sneered at my career, mocked my patience with Emmett, and made it clear she thought he should be aiming for law school, not a kitchen. And yet, Patricia, my wife, her daughter, always chose her mother over me, always playing peacemaker. I squeezed Emmett's shoulder. "Just cook like you mean it. Let the food speak." He nodded, eyes shining, and I retreated upstairs, glancing at our family wall. There were photos of Patricia smiling, of Emmett covered in flour at 10, of me accepting an award for food writing when words had once been my weapon. I'd laid those down for peace, but I hadn't forgotten how to use them. What I didn't know was that 3 days ago I'd made a call. A favor from old friends in the culinary world, chefs, talent scouts, even a food magazine editor, had converged into a secret plan. Tonight, Emmett's food would speak for itself. And Beatrice Marlowe? She was about to be blindsided. I headed back down just in time to see Emmett plating the first course with surgical precision. Then I heard it. A low, condescending voice from the side door. "Patricia, dear. Should we see about helping in the kitchen?" I froze. Beatrice had let herself in, 3 hours early, phone in hand, ready to sabotage everything. My son's first real shot at recognition. And she had no intention of letting it succeed. I realized, in that cold moment, that this wasn't just about a dinner. This was war. And tonight, I'd have to decide just how far I was willing to go to protect my son. Patricia and I had built a life that was quietly complicated. Dayton wasn't New York, it wasn't flashy, but it was ours. I'd given up my job as a food critic, a career full of perks, bylines, and influence, because I wanted something tangible, something I could call my own. Patricia had been supportive, at first, but the moment her mother, Beatrice Marlowe, got involved, everything became a tightrope walk. Beatrice had spent her life turning everyone's achievements into reflections of her own standards. She married into money, yes, but she didn't just want wealth. She wanted obedience, perfection, and proof that her family was superior in every measurable way. Patricia had absorbed years of her mother's lessons about what success looked like, and I had absorbed years of her subtle contempt for me. Our son, Emmett, had grown up in that crossfire. He'd inherited my stubbornness, my hunger for excellence, but he'd also felt the sting of Beatrice's judgments early on. His first cooking experiment at age 8, an ambitious, chaotic mess of spaghetti carbonara, was met with a quiet, pointed critique from Beatrice. Why waste talent on something so trivial? From that moment, Emmett learned to hide his brilliance when his grandmother was around. He practiced in secret, perfected recipes on school nights while Beatrice lectured Patricia about how Emmett should focus on real ambition. I tried to shield him, but I couldn't always intervene without creating more tension. And Patricia, well, she was torn between loyalty to her mother and protecting her son, which often left Emmett and me on our own. The tipping point had been last month, at Emmett's high school graduation. Beatrice didn't just dismiss his culinary achievements. She openly compared them to her niece's law school acceptance, the kind of cutting comparison that made Emmett shrink inside while everyone else clapped politely. Patricia said nothing. I said nothing, trying to keep peace, but I could feel Emmett's confidence cracking. Tonight, Thanksgiving, was supposed to be different. I had called in every favor I had. Chef Calhoun, a local Michelin-starred chef, a talent scout for the Food Network, and a journalist known for spotlighting prodigies. They didn't know the dinner had moved from our home to a secret location downtown, but they would witness Emmett's talent, untainted by family judgment. Yet here we were, hours before the family arrived, and Beatrice had inserted herself into the kitchen. Calm on the outside, I could feel the storm building inside me. All the pent-up resentment, all the humiliation, all the years I'd tolerated her control, were about to collide with one night's opportunity. The plan I had in mind wasn't just about defending my son anymore. It was about sending a message. A first small domino in a sequence that would expose the lengths Beatrice had gone to suppress everyone around her for decades. But I had to be careful. One misstep and it wouldn't just be our dinner ruined, it would be Emmett's dream. And that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On Beatrice's phone screen, she was scrolling through a series of posts she'd preemptively written, ready to mock Emmett if his cooking failed. This wasn't just interference, it was sabotage, deliberate and calculated. For the first time, I realized the full stakes. Tonight wasn't just about a meal. It was about proving to everyone, especially my son, that brilliance could survive cruelty. But the question nagged at me. Could I orchestrate it without destroying the fragile trust he had in me? By mid-morning, the house felt like a battlefield disguised as a kitchen. Emmett moved with laser focus, plating dishes that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. Every chop, every sear, every drizzle was deliberate. And all the while, Beatrice hovered, lips pressed thin, judging silently, or so she thought. Patricia tried to mediate, hovering between the kitchen and the living room, her voice soft but conflicted. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't," she started. But Beatrice waved her off like a child. "I'm just observing. This is fine," she said, eyes darting to the side to make sure Emmett caught her glare. I stayed in the background, observing, cataloging, reading their movements like I once read restaurants for reviews. Every glance, every whispered remark, every exhaled sigh. It was all data, and the data told a story I'd known all along. Beatrice didn't just disapprove. She thrived on control, on humiliation, on bending the people around her to her will. The first guests began arriving early, as if they sensed the tension in the air. Patricia's brother, Duncan, arrived with his family, moving stiffly under his mother's critical gaze. He'd always been the obedient one, the son she shaped into someone incapable of disappointment. Watching him now, I realized just how much power she wielded with fear. Emmett, oblivious to the creeping dread, was plating the main course, a heritage turkey brined for days, caramelized to perfection, with a side of butternut squash puree he'd reinvented with truffle and sage. I could see the pride in his eyes, but there was a shadow too, a premonition that his hard work might be dismissed. Then it happened. Patricia stepped into the kitchen, her face pale. Beatrice leaned close, whispering something into her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Patricia stiffen, then nod reluctantly. My heart sank. Whatever she said, Patricia was considering it. Minutes later, Patricia returned with a forced smile. "Dad, maybe we should have some pizzas delivered just in case," she said, her voice trembling. My chest tightened. I knew instantly. Beatrice had poisoned her judgment, convinced her to undermine Emmett. I looked at my son, unaware of the betrayal creeping over the kitchen. His eyes shone with hope, trust, and vulnerability. And I realized that if we let this happen, years of work, of practice, of dreams would be shredded. Right then, I made a decision that would change everything. I walked calmly upstairs, packed 2 duffel bags, clothes, essentials, Emmett's knife set, my laptop, and told Patricia, "We're leaving." Her gasp froze me in place. "Leaving? For what? It's just pizza." "Your mother just told you dog food is better than his cooking," I said, voice icy calm. And you were going to let it happen. Patricia opened her mouth, but no words came. Emmett turned toward us, tears brimming in his eyes. Dad, I can't leave. My food. It's just dinner. Let them eat pizza. I pulled him close. No, this isn't just dinner. This is you. You deserve better than this. We both do. Within 20 minutes, we were gone. Stepping into the cold morning air, duffel bags in hand, leaving a house full of perfectly prepared food behind. Behind us, Beatrice stood frozen in the doorway, the embodiment of shock and disbelief. And I knew in that moment that the first domino had fallen. The rest was just waiting to collapse. We didn't go far. Downtown, a small boutique hotel with a closed restaurant had become our sanctuary. I checked us into 2 adjoining rooms, letting Emmett decompress while I made calls to the people who could turn this disaster into opportunity. Chef Calhoun, a Michelin-starred mentor named Roland Devereux, and a Food Network talent scout, Serena King. By late afternoon, we were back in the kitchen, this time with no judgment, no interference, just pure focus. Emmett plated the dishes with an almost religious precision. The butternut squash soup, the duck confit, the artisan bread, the desserts. It was as if the kitchen itself was conspiring to elevate his talent. Then the first twist hit like a punch to the gut. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Patricia. Mom, she knows. She's spreading it online. Beatrice sent your old editor a tip about Emmett's cooking and that we left. She framed it like we abandoned the dinner because of him. People are already talking. I stared at the screen, a cold fury building. Beatrice had anticipated our move. She had leaked our departure to a journalist, hoping to make Emmett look like the failure, make me look like the tyrant. She didn't just want control. She wanted to humiliate us publicly. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was a trap, one we had to flip. I sent rapid texts, confirming arrivals, prepped a secret dining setup for the guests who were already on their way, and instructed Emmett to ignore the buzzing phones. This is your stage, I told him. They won't ruin it. Not if we control the narrative. By 3:30 p.m., our table was set, our hidden audience seated, and Emmett's food ready to shine. The first guest, my old editor, arrived, followed by Roland and Serena. They stepped into the small, warm kitchen, eyes widening as they took in the courses. Who cooked this? Roland asked, astonished, tasting the duck confit. My son, I said, proud but calm. He's been working toward this his entire life. They paused, absorbing the skill, the vision, the artistry. Then Serena, already typing on her phone, looked up. This isn't just talent. This is TV ready. Emmett, you realize what you've just done? He shook his head, disbelief shining in his eyes. I just wanted to cook. And that's when I realized the truth, and the second shock of the evening. Beatrice had underestimated us. She had tried to humiliate him, manipulate my wife, and leak the story. But by forcing our hand, she had given Emmett the platform he needed. The betrayal that should have broken him had instead amplified his brilliance. As they tasted, praised, and recorded, I watched my son, glowing, confident, unstoppable. And I smiled, knowing one thing. This was just the beginning. That night, in the dim light of our hotel room, I finally allowed myself to think beyond the immediate victory. Emmett was exhausted but elated, and I could see the spark returning to his eyes, the one Beatrice had tried to snuff out for years. I poured a glass of whiskey, feeling the cold clarity of a plan forming. Beatrice Marlowe had spent decades controlling everyone around her. My ex-wife had been complicit, my nephew had been groomed to obey, and my son had been crushed under the weight of her pride. Public humiliation alone wasn't enough. I needed leverage. I needed a reckoning that would make her understand, on a level she respected, status, reputation, influence, that cruelty had limits. I started digging. Corporate filings, old interviews, charity audits, past news articles. Beatrice had built her empire on appearances, on the illusion of benevolence, while quietly suppressing anyone who challenged her. The deeper I went, the more I realized how much material there was. Her Family Values Foundation had barely funded anything substantial. Her nephew's failing pharmaceutical career was propped up entirely by her interference. And there were dozens of people who had been silenced, bullied, or fired because of her whims. I reached out to a few of them. Former colleagues, classmates, even the diner manager where she'd worked as a girl before marrying into wealth. One by one, they agreed to tell their stories, some on record, some confidentially. I had learned long ago that Beatrice could handle manipulation, charm, and lies, but she couldn't handle truth. And then the final piece fell into place. The annual Marlowe Charity Gala, her crowning achievement of public image. 500 guests, hundreds of thousands of dollars, press coverage, influencers, donors, all watching her perform perfection. If I could expose her hypocrisy there, in front of everyone she valued, the collapse would be total. I spent 2 weeks planning every detail. The menu, prepared by Emmett, would tell her story through food. Her humble beginnings, the dreams she abandoned, the paths she crushed, and the artificial empire she built. Guests would be guided through a narrative where every dish revealed another layer of truth. A visual presentation would show photos, old articles, and testimonials, culminating in the revelation of Emmett's Thanksgiving dinner, the meal she dismissed as dog food. Emmett, of course, was on board. He was ready to let his talent speak and to let her judgment be mirrored back at her. Patricia remained a wild card. She called twice, apologetic, torn, but she knew by now that she couldn't choose her mother over her son. By the night of the gala, the pieces were in place. Every bite, every frame, every detail had been calculated to expose decades of control, cruelty, and suppression. And I felt a cold satisfaction as I realized this. Beatrice Marlowe would finally see what happens when you push a wolf too far. The gala was a spectacle of high society. Chandeliers glittering, 500 impeccably dressed guests murmuring over champagne, cameras flashing. Beatrice Marlowe moved through the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom, oblivious to the storm about to hit. The first courses went out, subtle nods to her humble beginnings. A cornbread soufflé with collard greens, elevated but still recognizable. Whispers began to ripple through the room as the presentation screens flickered to life. Old photos of Beatrice in a diner uniform, newspaper clippings, quotes from former colleagues, all telling the story she had spent decades erasing. Gasps echoed across the room. And then the second twist hit. Midway through the presentation, the room went dark, and the menu for the evening appeared on the screens. The final course wasn't just symbolic, it was personal. Emmett's Thanksgiving dinner, every dish he had labored over, was displayed in all its glory. Every guest could see the brilliance she had dismissed as dog food. Beatrice froze, her lips parting in disbelief. But it wasn't just the exposure that shocked her. I had arranged for live streaming. Every influential food critic, journalist, and social media influencer who had been following Emmett's story now witnessed her judgment and cruelty broadcast to thousands online. The humiliation wasn't contained, it was viral. Then the unexpected happened. Patricia, standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. She didn't speak directly to her mother. Instead, she addressed the audience. This young man's talent was ignored, ridiculed, and nearly crushed by the very person who claims to uphold family values. Tonight, he shows what happens when belief, not control, guides a child's potential. The crowd erupted in applause. Beatrice's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no one listened. The second shock. Several former associates of hers, previously anonymous, now stood in the audience, nodding and whispering to journalists. Their stories were ready to be published immediately, corroborating every hidden lie, every act of suppression. In one night, decades of control, perfection, and intimidation collapsed. Beatrice Marlowe had lost not only her public image but the narrative she had manipulated for so long. And in the midst of it all, Emmett, calm and radiant, plated the final dessert. A deconstructed apple tart with cinnamon gelato, each bite a testament to skill, patience, and resilience. I realized then that the second twist wasn't just about public humiliation. It was the revelation of the network of lies, the collusion of silenced voices, and the power of my son's brilliance amplified by the truth. The empire she had built on fear and appearances had no foundation to stand on. And I knew, as the room buzzed with shock and admiration, that this night would be remembered not just for the food, but for the reckoning of a lifetime. After the applause faded and the last plates were cleared, I watched Beatrice Marlowe slump into a velvet chair, her designer gown a stark contrast to the humiliation written across her face. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was exposed. But the full truth, the reason behind decades of cruelty, would hit even harder. I had uncovered it during my planning. Beatrice hadn't been cruel merely out of pride or control. She had a calculated fear of insignificance, born from a life she had constantly tried to rewrite. Before marrying into wealth, she had been Margaret Carlyle, daughter of a coal miner, scraping through community college while working 2 jobs. She dreamed of cooking, loved the creativity, and even planned to attend culinary school. But the moment Monroe Marlowe, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, noticed her, she abandoned everything. The choice wasn't simple ambition. It was survival, the deliberate erasure of her true self to gain power, status, and security. She had learned early that showing vulnerability or talent that wasn't socially sanctioned could be weaponized against her. And so she had projected that fear outward, crushing anyone who reminded her of the life she had discarded. She didn't just want control. She wanted to ensure no one in her family ever achieved the self-worth or fulfillment she had sacrificed. Emmett's talent, vibrant and fearless, mirrored the dreams she had buried. Every compliment, every recognition he could earn, was a threat to the carefully constructed illusion of her invulnerability. That's why she dismissed him. That's why she undermined me, manipulated Patricia, leaked stories to the press. Patricia finally understood it, and I watched her quietly turn away from her mother for the first time in years. Emmett, oblivious to the depth of the psychological terror he had survived, continued to plate dishes with serene focus. But I knew this wasn't just a culinary victory. It was a confrontation with a lifetime of intentional harm. Beatrice's cruelty had always been disguised as concern, guidance, and the best intentions of a matriarch. But tonight, stripped of pretense, the truth was undeniable. Her actions were born of fear, selfishness, and a ruthless desire to control the narrative of her own life. She had punished my son for being the person she once feared she could have been. And now, she faced the consequences of her choices in front of everyone who mattered, while the one she tried to destroy, my son, stood unbroken, his brilliance undeniable. The reckoning wasn't just poetic, it was absolute. The final course was served. Emmett moved with quiet confidence, plating each dish like a masterful storyteller. The audience didn't just taste the food, they saw the narrative. The humble beginnings, the sacrifices, the crushed dreams, and the brilliance that refused to be suppressed. Every plate told a truth Beatrice Marlowe had spent decades hiding. When the screens flickered to reveal the abandoned Thanksgiving dinner, the feast she had dismissed as dog food, the room erupted. Gasps, whispers, phones raised to record every detail. I watched her face drain of color, the meticulously crafted image of the matriarch unraveling in real time. Patrons, journalists, and industry insiders stared, incredulous at the cruelty they had witnessed through the lens of truth. Patricia stood beside me, silent but resolute, no longer swayed by her mother's manipulation. Emmett, radiant and composed, plated the final dessert, a deconstructed apple tart with cinnamon gelato, and the applause that followed wasn't just for the food. It was for resilience, for triumph over years of suppression. Beatrice couldn't hide. Former colleagues and classmates I'd contacted over the previous weeks stepped forward, corroborating the story of her calculated cruelty. The gala, meant to elevate her image, had instead exposed every lie, every act of control, every betrayal. Her empire of appearances crumbled in front of the people she had worked so hard to impress. By midnight, the fallout was already underway. Articles were published, social media buzzed with shock and admiration, and even the press covering the gala couldn't ignore the scandal. Emmett's name was everywhere, celebrated as a young prodigy who had survived the tyranny of his own family to emerge triumphant. I turned to my son, pride swelling in my chest. "You did it, Em. All of it." He smiled, exhausted but unbroken. "We did it, Dad. Together." The next morning, the Marlowe Foundation announced changes. Beatrice was removed as chairwoman, her influence diminished, her control finally challenged. Patricia signed the divorce papers quietly, finally choosing a life where her child's happiness, and her own, came first. And Emmett? He was offered apprenticeships, mentorships, and opportunities that only years of talent and a story like this could create. I leaned back in the quiet of our new life, thinking about what we'd endured. Beatrice had tried to crush us with judgment, manipulation, and deception. But in the end, all it took was one man remembering how to fight, and a boy brave enough to cook for his dreams. And as Emmett plated his weekend pop-ups in our small restaurant, the sign outside glowing against the evening sky, I realized something. Talent without belief is nothing. Talent with belief can change the world, or at least ruin a very fancy dinner party. Either way, it's worth every risk. And that's exactly what we did.